Welcome to today's third installment of Gunston Hall's Symposium Dissent Made Material. My name is Rebecca Martin. I'm the Director of Education and Guest Experiences at Gunston Hall, and I am very pleased to welcome Jennifer Torres, the Registrar at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, we're so glad to have you with us. Jennifer is going to be talking about gifts to President Ronald Reagan, and that talk is called Dissent is Not Disunity. Now, I want to make sure that you understand a couple of things, logistical things. One of them is that if you have questions during this talk, you should be sure to put those into the comments in Facebook. We will pass them along to Jennifer at the end of the presentation. So again, if you have any questions, please make sure that you share those via chat. And if you are concerned that you missed the last two episodes of our symposium, don't worry. This one and those two will be available after this program at our Facebook page and at Gunston Hall's YouTube channel. Jennifer, let's go ahead and get started.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Jennifer Torres, and I am the registrar at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. So that means I'm in charge of our artifact collection. So everything to do with the objects in our collection, the ones that are downstairs in our storage, upstairs on exhibit, if they go out on loan to another museum, I do research on the background of them or research and writing for exhibits. So I'm going to talk to you today about just a few of the things that we have in our collection that are interesting, maybe a little challenging, but definitely have a message to them. So if I can get the slides up, the presentation. All right, so it is, as she said, dissent is not disunity. I can get the controls. There we go. All right, so here's a quote from President Reagan to the people group. And he says, I hope you'll mention to them that our capacity for arguing and arguing it all out in public is actually the strength of our system, that dissent is not disunity. So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit, like I said, about our collection, but also the National Archives and the Presidential Library System, give you a little bit of background as to these objects, why we have them, how we got them, just for people who aren't familiar with the National Archives. And just so you know, there's going to be one object that has some Holocaust imagery. So when I get to the Bitburg Cemetery slide, that's where that's going to be. So in case anybody wants to be aware of that. So NARA and the Presidential Libraries. So NARA is the National Archives and Records Administration. And as part of their mission, they actually oversee the Presidential Library System. So you can see this is the National Archives building in Washington, D.C. If anybody's had a chance to visit there and see the rotunda and the Charters of Freedom, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are all there. So our holdings actually date back to 1775, and across the system, there's 10 billion pages of textual records, 12 million maps, 25 million still photos, 24 million aerial photos, 30,000 reels of motion picture film, 40,000 videos and sound recordings, and over 133 terabytes of electronic data, which is probably our fastest growing segment with the way things are today. So as part of the Presidential Library System, there are 15 presidential libraries. They go from President Hoover onward. The Presidential Library System formally began in 1939 when President Roosevelt donated his personal collections to the federal government because he felt they were the best repository for that. And then they actually went back and they added a few before President Roosevelt in chronological order. And there's something called the Presidential Records Act, and that applies to all the libraries from President Reagan onward. And it basically says that all the papers generated in the course of the administration belong to the government and thus immediately become part of the government collection or under government control once the administration ends. And that also applies to the gifts. So the gifts are part of the federal collection, and that is what I oversee. So President Reagan has a library in Simi Valley, and it was opened in 1989, and that is where all of President Reagan's papers and objects live. And so you can see some images for those of you who haven't come. This is what our building looks like. This is our piece of the, oh, go back. piece of the Berlin Wall that we have out back. And then the two things that we're known for, we have a full-scale Oval Office replica in the library. Some places have a half-scale or a half-sized Oval Office, or it's maybe not quite to scale. Ours is true to scale. They actually had to lower the floor because the ceiling was so tall in the Oval Office. So rather than raise the ceiling, they lowered the floor. And then we have Air Force One. We're the only library with an Air Force One pavilion, so we're quite proud of that. The 707 that President Reagan flew on. So the bulk of what I oversee are presidential gifts. So people would give things to the president. In this case, President Reagan actually recorded one gift. It was a gold pocket watch with the Olympic rings in diamonds that was given to him. And he says in his actual diary that it will go to a museum. And so you now know where it is. It is in my museum downstairs in my collection. So a couple different types of gifts that we have. We have foreign official or head of state gifts. We have things from Queen Elizabeth, from the Emperor of Japan, from the King of Saudi Arabia. These are the ones that you might kind of imagine, whether they're antiques, whether they're made out of gold and diamonds, and they're part of state protocol. So the head of the other nation would give something to President Reagan. The Reagans would usually give something to them, and that's part of state protocol. Other gifts were actually handed to President Reagan. If you went to the White House, if you visited him in the Oval Office, a lot of times people would bring a gift. If President Reagan spoke at your graduation, at your club, a lot of times they would hand him something. But the vast majority of gifts were actually just mailed to the White House. President Reagan, White House, USA, and they were sent there. And eventually they went through something called the White House Gift Unit, which processed them. And then eventually they ended up in Simi Valley at the library. So what we have currently, we have 84,064 objects, and I know because we have counted all of them. We've done 100% inventory of our collection. Our collection spans 160 different countries, and there's about 190 on the planet, so we've got a pretty good percentage. Also, we have countries gave gifts that where the countries don't actually exist anymore. There are countries that didn't exist back then. So I have been on Google Earth looking up cities in the former Yugoslavia, going, what country is this in now? So, you know, 9th grade geography is coming in handy. Our collection actually spans 60 million years because I have one piece that skews the curve. It is a 60 million-year-old piece of fossilized amber from the Dominican Republic. After that, it goes to about 3,000 years old. We have some Roman and Phoenician glassware, but the majority of the gifts are actually contemporary. But I always like to say, you know, you name it, we probably have one of it in the collection because it's whatever people felt like sending into President Reagan. So here's just some examples of gifts that we have. And now every time I see a photograph of President Reagan with an object, I'm like, do we have that? Do we have that? So a very long-term project of ours is gathering up all those photos so that we have a complete record of the object. So here is President Reagan in the Oval Office with Tommy Lasorda and his wife, who presented them with Dodger jackets and bats after the Dodger championship in 1981. So another tradition was for St. Patrick's Day. So here is Garret Fitzgerald, the Prime Minister of Ireland, who presented President Reagan with a Waterford bowl, originally, which held shamrocks. President Reagan with members of the National Law Enforcement Council, and they gave him the hat and the plaque. President Reagan meeting with the artist John Nieto, who presented him with this painting, Delegate to the White House. This one's kind of fun. This is the Omnibot 2000 personal robot. It was actually controlled by cassette tape, and it was given to President Reagan when he visited Purdue University's Technology Lab in 1987. And he was given a saddle by the Prime Minister of Australia. Saddles were popular gifts. We have over 20 in the collection, though President Reagan actually rode more of an English style, but most of the gifts were Western style because he had that Western sort of cowboy image. But not everything was truly what we consider a gift. Some people wanted something from the president, whether they wanted a job, whether they wanted a policy passed. Sometimes they actually would send something and said, here's one for you, and here's one for Gorbachev. Can you please pass it along? But what we're talking about today are objects that were actually sent to express dissent or to protest particular actions or policies that President Reagan had taken. And they chose, rather than to write a letter, to actually make a gift to send it into President Reagan to make their statements. So one thing that people would send gifts around, or these protest gifts, is sort of military policy and POW MIA. And sometimes it's not necessarily that they're protesting Reagan's action, they disagree with what he's doing. Sometimes they just want him to do something more. So President Reagan had dealt with POWs and Vietnam veterans quite a bit. Back when he was governor of California, they would hold these dinners to raise money to support POWs. But there were people who always, still in the 1980s, really wanted the United States to try to have a bigger push to identify remains in those countries. So here's President Reagan speaking at the DMZ outside of the Republic of Korea. And this is one gift that we have. It's a G.I. Joe doll, the old-fashioned style. And the gifter actually removed one of the legs and put a prosthetic leg in it. And this was actually sent in to protest the United States involvement in military affairs of other countries, whether they thought we were spending too much money on it, whether they thought we should have spent money on something else, or whether they just thought we should spend more attention to the United States. They didn't agree with what the military at large was doing. Like I said, President Reagan did a lot surrounding Vietnam veterans as governor and as president. While he was president is when they sent out for designs for the new Vietnam Veterans Memorial. And of course, they chose the design, the black wall. So President Reagan is visiting it here. He's speaking at the dedication ceremony for the statue that went alongside of it in 1984. He actually presented the unknown soldier, the Vietnam unknown soldier, with the Congressional Medal of Honor in 1984. And then he would speak often at the POW MIA families events. And so this stocking was actually sent into President Reagan. So it's later POW MIA. It's made out of felt. They cut more felt out and they made Southeast Asia and outlined the different countries in gold glitter. And they basically wanted to draw attention to the POWs and the MIAs that were still missing and that the families didn't know anything about. And they really wanted more attention paid to that in the hopes that they'd be able to identify more soldiers and their remains. So one controversy that came up was when President Reagan went to Germany in 1985. He was invited to go there by Helmut Kohl to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the end of World War II. And the idea is that they would lay a wreath at a military cemetery. But it turns out, move on to the next slide, that at the Bitburg Cemetery, there were 49 members of the SS who were buried there, and the advance team did not realize this when they made the arrangements. When it came out, a number of Jewish leaders, members of Congress, and Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel were among those who asked him not to go to the cemetery. And there was some back and forth about whether he should cancel the trip or go or not go. And they ended up deciding to keep on with their plans and to go to the cemetery. But they did add a stop to a concentration camp, which was not originally on the schedule. But so they did add a stop at Bergen-Belsen. So here is a picture of President Reagan and Helmut Kohl at the military cemetery. And they also invited General Matthew Ridgway, who had fought in World War II, along with the German General Johann Steinhoff, who met at the cemetery. They shook hands. They were there when they laid the wreath. And this was supposed to be sort of a healing event to mark, the cooperation and the friendship between Germany in the 1980s and the United States. And they did, in fact, go to Bergen-Belsen. Here's President and Mrs. Reagan. There, President Reagan is laying a wreath. They visited the site where the Nazi victims were buried, including Anne Frank. And you can see they're touring the visitor center there and learning more information about what happened at Bergen-Belsen. But a lot of people weighed in on this controversy. And so including this one donor who was from Los Angeles, and she created this armband, and it has on it both a swastika and a Star of David. It's hand sewn, hand painted, and embroidered. And she sent this to President Reagan to protest his planned visit to visiting the cemetery at Bitburg and asked him not to attend. So nuclear weapons, of course, were very much overshadowing President Reagan's presidency. You can see here in his SDI speech, though, that his belief was that the defense policy of the United States is based on a simple premise. The United States does not start fights. We will never be an aggressor. We maintain our strength in order to deter and defend against aggression, to preserve freedom and peace. And this is one of the things that he said in his SDI speech from the White House when he addressed this to the American people, to lay out his plan about why he thought SDI was so important. So his, the famous phrase, peace through strength, President Reagan's long-range goal was to eliminate nuclear weapons, though it was not just to build and build and build them up. He pursued a missile defense system. So the idea was that if somebody would fire a missile at you, you would be able to deploy the system and it would destroy the missile before it reached its target. So his belief was that this would actually make nuclear weapons obsolete, because if they could be defended against, nobody would use them anymore. When he announced that he was doing this, the Soviet Union was very upset, but President Reagan said that he would actually share this technology with everybody. And there were certain people that didn't believe he would really do that, because why would he share nuclear secrets? But it was because of his belief that if everybody knew how to defend against them, nobody would need nuclear weapons anymore because they wouldn't be useful. So some important events during President Reagan's time was the strategic arms reduction talks, the START talks, and these came after the SALT talks under the Carter administration. And this is where they actually met with the Soviet Union and tried to reduce the amount of arms, or to limit the amount of certain types of missiles that each country was legally allowed to have. There's the Strategic Defense Initiative, or Star Wars, and once again, that was the missile defense system. And then there was the Intermediate Nuclear Forces, or INF Treaty, and intermediate weapons are ones that had a range of about, I think it was 2,000 kilometers. So they could kind of go from country to country, versus an intercontinental missile, which could be fired in the United States and go to Europe. So here's President Reagan giving a speech on the START talks. And then talking about SDI, you can see the model on the desk is a model of one of the exo-atmospheric kill vehicles, which were part of the things that would kind of fly through space, hit the missile, cause it to detonate, so then it wouldn't actually reach its target. President Reagan laying out the plan to the American people in the SDI speech. And then giving another speech about the INF Treaty, and then actually signing the INF Treaty along with General Secretary Gorbachev in 1987. And kind of a fun fact, they actually traded pens. So at the Reagan Library, the pen that you can see Gorbachev used to sign, we actually have that pen on display along with our copy of the INF Treaty. And then the nuclear football, which contains the codes, was always carried by military aid, within kind of arm's reach of the president at all times. We have our copy of the nuclear football on our Air Force One exhibit at the library, but you can see an example of it here. And so, of course, nuclear weapons were very important to a lot of people in America and all around the world. And so a number of people did send pieces having to do with nuclear weapons. So this is a globe, and it's made out of paper mache. It's actually about a little over 2.5 feet in diameter. And it's got this little trapdoor in it. And inside were hundreds and hundreds of messages, mostly pre-printed postcards saying things like, "Renew the face of the earth, the God of peace is never glorified by human violence." And then people would sign their name. And they were asking President Reagan to not just reduce the amount of arms, but actually to get rid of them altogether. Their goal was to have no nuclear weapons anywhere in the world. And so they decided to send their messages by globe and not just by post. So one of the particular types of missiles is a Pershing missile, and these were stationed in West Germany. They were the counterpart to the Soviet SS-20 missiles, and so they would have been able to reach the Soviet Union within about 10 minutes if they were deployed from Germany. And so you can see what one looks like here on the test. And so there was the Nonviolent Peace Association in Dortmund, West Germany. And so they created these models of the missiles, most probably the Pershing II missiles, and they sent those into President Reagan along with a petition written in English and in German protesting the missile deployment. They did not want the missiles in West Germany. They probably didn't want them anywhere in Europe, but the actual petition was asking President Reagan to remove them from Germany. Another type of missile is the MX missile. It later became the LGM-118 Peacekeeper, but when it was in its design phase, it was MX for Missile Experimental. This is an ICBM, so it can actually go from the United States to Europe. They were deployed in silos across Wyoming. Each of these missiles could hold up to 10 warheads, and each one costs approximately $70 million. So they ended up only building about half of what they had initially intended. So they built about 50 of these. You can see them being assembled in the photo here. So somebody did not like the price tag on this. And so President Reagan received this t-shirt where he says, "It will be a great day when our schools get all the money that they need and the Air Force has to hold a bake sale to buy an MX missile." So this was actually created and sent in by members of the Allegan Senior High School in Allegan, Michigan. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. But so we do actually have gifts from people as young as 5 or 6, and then as old as 100. So we do have a number of gifts from schools, and sometimes they actually were part of the political discussion as well. So this is just kind of a small sample of some of the gifts that were given to President Reagan that actually had messages to them, that actually were against or for a particular policy. And they really thought that these types of gifts were the kinds of things that would maybe draw more attention. President Reagan received thousands and thousands and thousands of gifts. And so they really wanted to know that theirs would have a little bit more impact. So rather than just writing a letter, they thought their message would come across stronger, or that it would get more attention if it came in the form of these sort of handmade gifts. And so that is some examples from our collection of what we have. So does anybody have any questions?
Jennifer, that was wonderful. I do have a few questions from our audience. One of them is, do we know if the president saw any of these?
So these particular ones, I'm not sure about. But like I said, anytime President Reagan went to an event or somebody came to the Oval Office and handed it to them, then he would have seen them. But like I said, the vast majority of our objects were actually just mailed to the White House. So the gift unit would generally create a report, and they would, about every week or so, they would put out a report where they would say, these are the things that we got. And a lot of times they would sort of highlight the things they thought the president would be interested in. And then if he was interested, he could call and have them sent over, and whether he wanted to see them, whether he wanted to display them in the White House. But President Reagan did actually come to the Reagan Library when it was first built, and he did go through the gift departments, and he had no idea he'd be given as many objects as he really had. So sadly, that was before my time, but I've heard stories from our longer serving staff that he was just amazed at how many of these pieces had actually been sent to him.
That's fascinating. And we have a question about what ends up in a presidential library. So how, who determines, and how is the determination made about what gifts get saved?
So the way it works for the Reagan collection, and it's been a little bit different before or later on, is that since we are a Presidential Records Act library, all of the gifts are considered gifts to the office and not gifts to the individual. So they do become part of the federal collection. So they don't go through and say, oh, we like this one, we don't like this one. Pretty much everything comes. There were some exceptions, of course, if stuff was perishable, food was destroyed, sometimes people would send flowers. Real utilitarian items, like if they just sent in a blanket or a television, might get donated to charity, but the vast majority of the objects, especially anything that was specifically directed to President Reagan or Mrs. Reagan, did in fact end up at the library.
Fascinating. And then another question specifically about the gifts that you showcased. Do these kinds of gifts often come with extensive written comments, or are they intended to stand on their own?
It depends. Some of them were intended to stand on their own, and we basically just sent the object. Others actually did include, like I said, the Globe had hundreds and hundreds of individual messages. Most of them were pre-printed, so they didn't write their own letters. They basically just signed their name on sort of predetermined messages, just to sort of show their support. And other times you get a proclamation where somebody would write up their statement, and then a couple hundred people would sign that in support. And then in this case, the missiles, like I said, they actually came with a statement written in German and then repeated in English, specifically stating what they wanted. There's one piece which isn't in this collection because it's more of a domestic issue. It's actually a door, like the one behind me, this side. And it's from a home builders association in Mississippi. And they literally say on it, they wrote the letter on the door because they said, we sent you a letter. We didn't, really get the response that we wanted. So we thought this might get your attention. And so they wrote the message on the object on the door. So it just kind of depended on the gifter.
Back to that globe, we have a question about where it came from. Do you know, did it come from a particular organization or a part of the country?
That one actually, it did not come from a particular part of the country. People from all over could sign it. The records aren't always the best when it says who the donors are. This one was just kind of a group of concerned citizens sent this in, as opposed to like the missiles where it actually had the name of the organization. So whether there was a formal name for an organization or whether it was just a lot looser than that, I don't know. But that's kind of all the record that I have.
And we've got two questions that have to do with the sort of quantity of gifts. So one of them is about what percentage of the gifts are handmade versus something that someone picked up somewhere. Do you have a sense of that?
I'd say a lot of the gifts are actually handmade, over half. And when I say handmade, I mean, it can be things like a school project where we've got things made out of, glitter and jelly beans. We have quite a bit of jelly bean art instead of, macaroni art. We have jelly bean art, from Girl Scouts, made a map of the USA in jelly beans. We have hand dipped jelly bean earrings. We have a Kleenex box, a Kleenex holder, which is actually plastic canvas, and it's in the shape of the White House, and it's got Christmas lights in it, so it lights up. Then, of course, we have, very nice paintings and sculptures and things which tend to be more of the head of state gifts. But there is a lot of handmade objects in the collection, and most of those were not done for dissent. They were actually done to express their admiration, their love, their support of President Reagan. So we've got lots of embroidered pictures. We've got handmade bookmarks. Once again, like I said in the beginning of the slide, I always joke, you name it, we probably have one of it in the collection. Lots of things embroidered with President and Mrs. Reagan's name on it. So,
who knew about some of these things? Wow. That's incredible. I do have one more that has to do with quantity, and that is to bring us back to the question of dissent. What percentage of the gifts do you think show some sort of disagreement with the president's policies or ideas versus are complimentary gifts?
A very, very small percentage. You saw a lot of them. There were ones that were sort of less flattering about either President Reagan or a different politician or a particular policy. There were ones that were, economic related, where they were, against inflation. So there were some games that people had made up. People would make origami art out of dollar bills to talk about economic policies. So they were more along the lines of, dear President Reagan, can you help us? As opposed to an actual disagreement or dissent. Or like I said, they might not have liked a particular politician or a particular foreign individual. There's some dartboards with faces and toilet paper with faces, things like that. But as far as actually disagreeing with President Reagan's policies, it's a very, very small percent of our collection.
Interesting. And we've got another question that's come in. This ties in a little bit to last week's installment of Dissent Made Material, which was by a quilt historian. And the question right now is, did President Reagan receive any quilts as gifts?
He did. We probably have over 30 quilts in the collection. We have, some that are every president. So each square is a president's face that's been embroidered. We have some that are more traditional style quilts. We have a lot of Afghans as well. So not quilts, but, crocheted or knitted. We have an entire row that's basically quilts and blankets. Latch hook. We have a lot of latch hook rugs, some in the shape of jelly beans.
Latch hook. Now there's a craft that that has been passed by, I'm afraid. Well, this was really
very 1980s.
Yes. This was really great. Thank you. If anyone is interested in seeing Jennifer's presentation again, as I mentioned earlier, all of the parts of the Dissent Made Material Symposium are being recorded and then available on our Facebook page and on Gunston Hall's YouTube channel. So this was just wonderful. And I know that some people weren't able to come today. Everybody's schedule is complicated. And so that program will be available for anyone who didn't get a chance to tune in. So everyone who's watching now, please make sure that you tell your friends and family that they shouldn't miss this fantastic talk. And do go back and see our previous 2 programs if you haven't had a chance to watch those. Now, next week, we have the 4th and final part of our Dissent Made Material Symposium. That one is going to be at an earlier time. Please note that it will be at 6 p.m. rather than 7 p.m. So please join us next Thursday at 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Professor Hinda Mandel is going to take us into the 21st century, bring us into the 21st century. And she's going to be talking about handmade gifts and dissent in a talk titled Crafting Dissent Together, Apart, a Legacy of Craft Activism from a COVID Year. Again, that will be next Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please join us. We'd love to get your thoughts about today's program. We have an evaluation for you to complete. If you click on the link in the comments in Facebook, you'll be able to access that evaluation. Please let us know what you think about this program. We use that information to develop new programs and to make everything better. And finally, if you enjoyed this program, if you appreciate what Gunston Hall does, please consider donating. These kinds of programs are made possible in part by the donations of people who attend them, and we appreciate anything that you can give. In order to donate, again, please click on the link that you will find in the comment section of the Facebook page. Thank you again for joining us. Hope to see you next Thursday.